To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. James Montgomery stood in his garage workshop, methodically organizing his tools for the weekend project. At 42, he maintained the same disciplined approach to everything that had made him successful in his construction business. His calloused hands, evidence of years building houses from the ground up, carefully placed each wrench in its designated spot. 16 years ago, he'd married Felicia Harden, a beautiful accounting clerk he'd met at a coffee shop. She'd seemed perfect then, sweet, supportive, and eager to build a life together. They'd bought this house in suburban Denver when she was pregnant with their daughter Emma, now 15. James had built most of the additions himself. The deck where they'd hosted countless barbecues, Emma's treehouse, and the workshop where he'd taught his daughter how to use power tools. "Dad, I'm going to Sarah's," Emma called from the kitchen door. She was the light of his life, sharp, independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. Unlike her mother, who'd grown increasingly distant over the past year. "Home by 9. James called back, hearing her bike chain rattle as she pedaled away. Felicia had been acting strange lately. The woman who once greeted him with enthusiasm when he came home from job sites now barely looked up from her phone. Their conversations had become perfunctory exchanges about schedules and bills. When he'd tried to address it, she'd deflected, claiming work stress. But it was the gifts that really bothered him. It started 3 months ago. James came home to find a small wrapped box on his nightstand with a note, "For my hard-working husband. Love, F." Inside was a vintage pocket watch, expensive and beautiful. When he'd thanked her, Felicia had smiled mysteriously and said she wanted to spoil him. The gifts kept coming. A leather wallet with his initials embossed in gold. A set of expensive whiskey glasses. A hunting knife with an ornate handle. Each one wrapped perfectly, each accompanied by a loving note. But something felt off. These weren't things Felicia would normally buy. She'd always been practical with money, often criticizing his tool purchases as unnecessary expenses. James's phone buzzed. A text from his brother Victor. "Beer tonight?" Patricia's visiting her sister. Victor Solomon was 5 years older and had spent 30 years as a Denver police detective before retiring last year. He'd never married Patricia, but they'd been together for 8 years. Victor was the only person James trusted completely, the man who'd taught him how to throw a punch, how to read people, and how to never let anyone take advantage of him. "Come by around 7, James texted back. "Felicia's got book club." That evening, Victor arrived with a 6-pack of Coors and the wary expression James had learned to recognize. His brother was still built like the linebacker he'd been in high school, though his dark hair was now more salt than pepper. "You look like hell," Victor said, settling into a lawn chair on the deck. "Thanks for the pep talk." James cracked open a beer. "Just tired." This about Felicia? James shouldn't have been surprised. Victor had always been able to read him. She's been different, distant, but also weirdly generous. Generous how? James explained about the gifts, watching his brother's expression grow more thoughtful with each item described. "That's not like her," Victor said finally. "In 16 years, when has Felicia ever been spontaneously generous?" It was true. Felicia had always been the practical one, the budgeter, the one who questioned every purchase. These expensive, thoughtful gifts were completely out of character. "Show me," Victor said. James led him to the bedroom, where he'd stored the gifts in the bottom drawer of his dresser. Victor examined each item carefully, turning them over in his hands like he was processing evidence. "James," Victor said slowly, "these aren't gifts. These are props." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. A pocket watch suggests you're old-fashioned, maybe out of touch. Expensive whiskey glasses implies you drink more than you do. A hunting knife." Victor paused, studying the ornate handle. "This is building a profile." "A profile of what?" "A dangerous man. Someone with violent tendencies and expensive tastes. Someone who might." Victor trailed off, his expression darkening. James felt ice form in his stomach. "Might what? I don't know yet. But I need to see everything she's given you. Tonight." Chapter 2. The Collection. James spent the next hour gathering every gift Felicia had given him over the past 3 months. The collection was more extensive than he'd realized when viewed all together. Victor laid everything out on the dining room table like evidence in a case file. Jesus, James, Victor muttered, photographing each item with his phone. There's more here than I thought. Beyond the items James had mentioned, there were others he'd forgotten about or dismissed. A pewter flask engraved with his initials, a book about military strategy, expensive cologne that was far more aggressive than his usual preference, a money clip containing exactly $500 in cash, and most disturbing, a small digital recorder with a note saying she thought he might want to capture his thoughts. The recorder bothers me most, Victor said, turning it over. This isn't a gift. This is evidence collection. Evidence of what? I'm not sure, but Victor paused, studying a leather journal Felicia had given James 2 weeks ago. Have you written in this? A few times. She said it might help with stress. Victor flipped through the pages, his face growing grimmer. James, what did you write about? Work stuff. Being frustrated with difficult clients. Normal complaints. Listen to yourself. You're talking about being frustrated and having difficult clients in a journal your wife bought you, along with a recorder she suggested you use to capture your thoughts. She's building a paper trail. The realization hit James like a physical blow. She's documenting that I'm unstable. That's my guess. The question is why. Victor continued examining the items, paying particular attention to the dates on the gift tags. Look at the timing. March 15th, March 22nd, April 2nd, April 9th. She's been methodical about this, building evidence over time. James sat heavily in his chair. 16 years of marriage, and his wife was systematically building a case against him. But for what purpose? In my experience, 3 possibilities. She's planning to divorce you and wants to paint you as dangerous to get a better settlement. She's having you committed to gain control of your assets. Or, Victor hesitated. Or what? Or she's planning something worse and needs you to look like the type of man who might disappear on his own. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. James felt his worldview crumbling. The woman he'd built a life with, the mother of his child, was systematically destroying him. There's something else, Victor said, pulling out his phone. I need to check something. He scrolled through his contacts and made a call. Hey, Martinez, it's Victor. I need a favor. Can you run a name for me? Eric Conrad. Yeah, I'll hold. Who's Eric Conrad? James asked. Guy who works at Felicia's accounting firm. Patricia mentioned him a few months ago, said Felicia talks about him a lot at their book club. James felt another piece click into place. She doesn't go to book club. What? Every Thursday for the past 4 months, she's gone to book club. But I've never seen her read a book. She's always on her phone or watching reality TV. Victor's call connected. Martinez? Yeah, I see. How long ago? All right. Thanks, I owe you one. He hung up and looked at James with a mixture of anger and sympathy. Eric Conrad filed for divorce from his wife 6 months ago, cited irreconcilable differences. But according to Martinez, word around the courthouse is that he cleaned out their joint accounts first. So he's got experience destroying marriages. And now he's working on yours. But James, this isn't just about an affair. If all she wanted was to leave you for him, she'd just file for divorce. This is something bigger. James stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where Emma had played as a child. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, was under attack by the person he'd trusted most. So what do we do? Victor was quiet for a moment, studying the collection of gifts. First, we figure out exactly what they're planning. Then we make sure they regret ever thinking they could outsmart a Montgomery. James turned back to his brother, feeling something cold and determined settle in his chest. He'd never been a man to accept betrayal quietly, and he wasn't about to start now. Chapter 3. The Discovery. The next morning, James went to work as if nothing had changed. He had 3 houses in various stages of construction, and his crew needed direction. But his mind was elsewhere, analyzing every interaction with Felicia over the past months through the lens of Victor's theory. She'd encouraged him to vent about difficult clients in the journal. She'd suggested he keep the recorder in his truck to practice presentations. She'd bought him the hunting knife for camping trips they'd never taken. Every gift now seemed sinister. His foreman, Peter Sharp, noticed his distraction. You all right, boss? You've been staring at that blueprint for 10 minutes. Peter was 28, ambitious, and one of the few people James trusted to run a site independently. He'd been considering making him a partner in the business. Just thinking through some personal stuff, James said. Peter, if something happened to me, would you be interested in buying the business? Peter's expression grew concerned. What kind of something? You're not sick, are you? No, nothing like that. Just planning ahead. But Peter's question stuck with him. What if Felicia's plan wasn't just about divorce or commitment? What if they were planning something permanent? That evening, Felicia announced she was going to book club again. James kissed her goodbye and watched her drive away in her Honda Accord. Then he called Victor. She just left. What's the plan? Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th. We're going to do some surveillance. Victor was waiting in his truck when James arrived. Get in. I already spotted her car. They followed Felicia to a hotel 20 minutes away. James watched his wife walk into the lobby like she owned the place, confident and purposeful in a way she hadn't been around him in months. Room 237, Victor said, lowering his binoculars. She's got a key card. They waited in the parking lot for 2 hours. James felt like he was watching his life implode in real time. When Eric Conrad finally arrived, James recognized him from the company picnic last year, tall, lean, with the kind of artificial charm that had always set James's teeth on edge. I want to hear what they're saying, James said. Bad idea. If they catch you, then what? They've already decided I'm a dangerous stalker. Might as well earn it. Victor studied his brother's face and nodded. All right, but we do this smart. They waited until Eric's car was the only other vehicle in the section of the parking lot below room 237. Victor produced a small listening device from his glove compartment. Retirement gift from the boys, he explained. Never know when you might need to eavesdrop on cheating spouses. Getting to the room's exterior wall required some creative climbing, but James's construction experience made it manageable. He placed the device against the window and retreated to Victor's truck, where they listened through wireless earbuds. Timeline needs to move up, Eric was saying. My divorce finalizes next month, and I can't keep fronting the money for this. Relax, Felicia's voice came through clearly. Everything's in place. The journal entries show he's becoming increasingly agitated and paranoid. The gifts establish a pattern of concerning behavior. When he disappears, everyone will assume he finally snapped. And Emma? James's blood turned to ice at the mention of his daughter. She'll be devastated, of course, but she'll recover. Children are resilient. And with James gone, I'll inherit everything. The business, the house, his life insurance. How much life insurance? $500,000, plus the business is worth at least that much again. Emma will be set for college, and we'll have enough to start over wherever we want. Eric's laugh was cold and calculating. Your husband really has no idea what's coming. James thinks everyone is as honest as he is. It's been almost too easy. Tomorrow night, after Emma goes to her friend's sleepover, I'll plant the final pieces of evidence. Some concerning internet searches on his computer, a few more journal entries about feeling desperate, maybe a note about how the pressure is getting to be too much. And then James Montgomery has a breakdown and disappears forever. Probably drives his truck off a mountain road somewhere remote. Men like him often can't handle failure, you know? Suicide by automobile accident. Very tragic, but ultimately believable. James closed his eyes, feeling rage build like pressure in a boiler. They weren't just planning to destroy his reputation or steal his money. They were planning to murder him and make it look like suicide. The perfect crime, Eric said, and the perfect wife for me. Much better than that pathetic man I've been married to. James actually thinks manual labor is admirable, as if building houses makes him some kind of hero. Their laughter felt like knives in James's chest. Victor gripped his shoulder. We've got everything we need. They climbed down from their position and returned to the truck. James sat in silence for several minutes, processing what he'd heard. I showed my brother, a retired detective, the gifts my wife kept giving, he said quietly. Why didn't I show you these sooner? As you examined the last box, your face went ashen. You said you were calling the cops, and I was coming home with you right now. With a grim voice, you told me, This isn't what you think it's about, Victor finished. It's not about love or money or even Eric Conrad. It's about murder. James nodded, feeling something fundamental shift inside him. The James who'd entered that hotel parking lot had been a man who believed in justice, in doing the right thing, in working within the system. The James who was leaving was someone different entirely. Victor, I need you to know something. I'm not going to the police. James. No. They plan to kill me. To take everything I've built and raise my daughter on the proceeds of my murder. There's no forgiveness for that. No second chances. Victor was quiet for a long moment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time they learned what happens when you betray a Montgomery. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. James spent the next morning making careful preparations. He called Peter Sharp and asked him to handle the job sites for the rest of the week, citing a family emergency. He contacted his lawyer about updating his will, ostensibly for estate planning purposes. He visited his bank and moved money into accounts Felicia couldn't access. Most importantly, he went shopping. The sporting goods store had everything he needed: camping gear, rope, a new hunting knife to match the one Felicia had given him, and other supplies for what he was beginning to think of as the project. He paid cash for everything, using bills from various ATMs around the city. That afternoon, he drove to a storage unit facility across town and rented a space under a false name, using a fake ID Victor had provided years ago as a joke. It wasn't entirely legal, but after 30 years as a cop, Victor knew how to navigate gray areas. You sure about this path? Victor asked when James called to update him. They were going to murder me and steal everything I've worked for. What would you do? Victor was quiet for a moment. Probably the same thing. But James, once you start down this road, there's no going back. I know. That evening, James sat at dinner with his family, watching Felicia play the role of loving wife while knowing she was planning his death. She asked about his day, complimented the salmon he'd grilled, and discussed Emma's upcoming chemistry test. The performance was flawless. Don't forget Emma's staying at Sarah's tomorrow night, Felicia said casually. They're working on that science project. Right? James said, cutting his fish. And you have book club? Actually, I was thinking of staying home. We could have a quiet evening together. Maybe watch a movie. James met her eyes across the table. She was planning to plant the final evidence tomorrow night, just as she'd told Eric. That sounds nice. After dinner, Emma disappeared to her room to video chat with friends. James helped Felicia clean up, marveling at her ability to maintain normal conversation while planning his murder. James, she said, loading the dishwasher, I've been thinking we should take a vacation. Maybe go somewhere in the mountains. You've been working so hard. The mountains sound perfect, he replied. In her mind, that's probably where his truck would be found. Later that night, after Felicia fell asleep, James slipped out to his workshop. He had calls to make and plans to finalize. Victor arrived 20 minutes later. I've been thinking about their timeline, Victor said. They're moving fast because Eric's divorce finalizes soon. If you're going to act, it has to be tomorrow night. I know. While Emma's at Sarah's and Felicia thinks she's planting evidence to frame me. What's the plan? James spread a map of the area on his workbench. Felicia told Eric they'd make it look like I drove off a mountain road. Probably thinking about Pikes Peak or one of the passes. Remote. Lots of places for a truck to accidentally go over. So that's exactly what's going to happen. Except it won't be my truck, and it won't be me driving. Victor studied the map. You're thinking about using their own plan against them. Eric's got a BMW. Similar size to my truck if it's burned badly enough. And there are plenty of remote areas where two people might disappear if they were, say, meeting for a romantic getaway that went wrong. The evidence. All those gifts Felicia gave me, they're going to be found in Eric's car, along with the journal pages about my supposed instability, but written in her handwriting. I've been practicing forging it. Victor was quiet for several minutes, studying the map and James's notes. This is elaborate. They were going to kill me, Victor. My daughter would have grown up thinking her father abandoned her or couldn't handle the pressure of life. This isn't just about revenge. It's about protecting Emma from ever learning the truth about what her mother really is. What about Felicia herself? James's expression hardened. She made her choice when she decided I was worth more dead than alive. Victor nodded slowly. What do you need from me? An alibi. Tomorrow night, we're having a beer at Murphy's pub watching the game. Lots of witnesses. And Emma? She's really staying at Sarah's. At least that part of Felicia's plan was true. She'll be safe. They spent the next 2 hours refining the details. James had learned attention to detail from years of construction work and Victor from decades of detective work. By the time they finished, their plan was thorough and bulletproof. James, Victor said as he prepared to leave. Once we do this, there's no undoing it. They sealed their fate when they decided to murder me for money. I'm just making sure justice gets served. After Victor left, James sat in his workshop until dawn, thinking about the 16 years he'd spent building a life with a woman who saw him as nothing more than a convenient target. By tomorrow night, Felicia Hardin Montgomery and Eric Conrad would learn that betraying a Montgomery came with a price they weren't prepared to pay. Chapter 5. The Setup. Friday morning dawned gray and cold, fitting James's mood perfectly. He went through his normal routine: coffee, checking the weather, kissing Felicia goodbye as she left for work. But every action felt like part of an elaborate performance. Emma bounded downstairs, backpack loaded for her sleepover. "Dad, can you drive me to Sarah's after school? Mom said she might be late getting home." "Of course, sweetheart." James hugged his daughter, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. Whatever happened tonight, Emma would never know the truth about what her mother had planned. After Emma left for school, James drove to his storage unit. Everything was ready: the camping gear, the rope, the forged journal pages in Felicia's handwriting, and several other items that would complete the picture. He'd spent hours practicing her writing style, and the results were convincing. His phone buzzed with a text from Peter Sharp. "Henderson project inspection went great. We're ahead of schedule." James smiled. At least his business would survive this. Peter was capable enough to keep things running, and James had already updated his will to include him as a partner. Emma's future would be secure. At noon, he drove past Felicia's office building and spotted Eric Conrad's BMW in the parking lot. The man had no idea he was living his last day. That afternoon, James picked up Emma and drove her to Sarah's house. The Hendersons were good people. Emma would be safe there, surrounded by normalcy while her world quietly realigned itself. "Love you, Dad," Emma said, hopping out of the truck. "Love you too, Em. More than you know." James spent the early evening at Murphy's pub with Victor, establishing their alibi. They ordered beers, watched the Broncos highlights, and made sure multiple people saw them together. To any observer, they were just two brothers enjoying a quiet Friday night. "You sure about the timing?" Victor asked quietly. "Felicia texted an hour ago. She's picking up takeout and heading home. Eric will be at the hotel by 8. And then we see how they like being on the wrong end of a setup." At 8:30, James excused himself to use the bathroom, but slipped out the back door instead. Victor would maintain the alibi for another hour before realizing James had left. By then, it would be too late for anyone to connect James to what was about to happen. James drove to the hotel where he'd watched Felicia and Eric meet. Eric's BMW was in the same spot as before. James parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using alleys and staying in shadows. Years of construction work had taught him how to move quietly and efficiently. The listening device Victor had used was still in place. James activated it and heard exactly what he'd expected: Felicia and Eric celebrating their upcoming success. "By Monday, James will be missing," Felicia was saying. "I'll play the worried wife perfectly. Maybe I suspected he was having problems, but hoped he'd work through them. And his body? Will never be found. Accidents happen in the mountains. Men go missing all the time." James smiled grimly. They were right about that. He moved to Phase 2. The hotel had security cameras, but James had studied their positions during his surveillance. He knew exactly where the blind spots were. Eric's BMW was unlocked, a mistake that would cost him everything. James quickly planted the evidence he'd prepared: several of Felicia's gifts to him, the forged journal pages describing his fictional plan to kill his wife and her lover, and a detailed map of mountain roads with specific locations marked. The final touch was a fake suicide note, written in his own handwriting, expressing remorse for what he was about to do, and explaining that he couldn't live with the betrayal. By 9:15, James was back at Murphy's pub, appearing slightly drunk and complaining to Victor about Felicia working late again. Multiple witnesses would remember his return. "She's probably having dinner with that Eric guy again," James said loudly enough for others to hear. "I'm starting to think there's something going on there." Victor played his part perfectly, telling James he was being paranoid and should trust his wife. The performance was Oscar-worthy. They stayed until closing time, with James becoming progressively more intoxicated and suspicious about his wife's activities. When they finally left, half the bar had heard James express concerns about Felicia's relationship with Eric. "Perfect setup," Victor said as they walked to their cars. "If anyone asks, you were drunk and jealous but still here with me." James nodded. "Phase 3 starts at midnight. You sure you don't want help? This is something I need to do myself." They separated, and James drove home to wait. Felicia's car was in the driveway, and lights were on throughout the house. She was probably planting her fake evidence right now, creating the digital trail that would prove James had snapped. Let her work, James thought. She had no idea that her own evidence would soon be irrelevant. At 11:45, James received the text he'd been waiting for. Heading to you now. Can't wait to celebrate. Eric was leaving the hotel, probably thinking he was about to claim his prize. Instead, he was driving toward his own destruction. James checked his gear one final time and headed out into the night. It was time to show Felicia and Eric what happened when you tried to destroy a Montgomery. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. James had chosen his location carefully. The old mining road 15 miles up Pikes Peak was perfect, remote enough that no one would hear anything, but accessible enough that the wreckage would eventually be found. He arrived 30 minutes before Eric's estimated time, parking his truck in a grove of trees and covering it with camouflage netting he'd bought at the Army surplus store. Everything had to look accidental. Eric's BMW appeared right on schedule, winding up the dark mountain road. James watched through night vision binoculars as the car pulled into the scenic overlook where he'd suggested they meet via a fake text from Felicia's phone. Eric sat in his car for several minutes, probably wondering why Felicia wasn't there yet. James smiled. She never would be. Moving silently through the trees, James approached the BMW from behind. Eric had left the engine running and was checking his phone, completely oblivious to the danger creeping up on him. James yanked open the driver's door before Eric could react. Surprised to see me? Eric's face went white. James, what are you? The answer came in the form of a tire iron to the head. James had measured the blow carefully, enough to incapacitate, not enough to kill. Not yet. Eric slumped forward, unconscious but breathing. James quickly zip-tied his hands and feet, then dragged him from the car. The man was heavier than he looked, but James had been lifting construction materials for 20 years. He placed Eric in the passenger seat of the BMW, then drove both vehicles to a more remote section of the mining road. This stretch had a steep drop-off with a curve that had claimed several cars over the years. Perfect for an accident. Eric began to regain consciousness as James positioned the BMW at the edge of the cliff. What? Where am I? Living the last few minutes of your life, James said calmly. Though I suppose you deserve to know why. Eric's eyes widened as he took in his situation, zip-tied in his own car, perched on the edge of a mountain drop-off. James, please, I can explain. Explain what? How you and my wife planned to murder me. How you were going to steal my business and raise my daughter on the insurance money from my death. Eric's face crumpled. You know, I know everything. The gifts, the fake evidence, the plan to make my disappearance look like suicide. Very creative. But you made one crucial mistake. What? You assumed I was the same trusting fool who married Felicia 16 years ago. I'm not. James pulled out a small recording device. Ironically, the same model Felicia had given him. I've documented everything. Your conversations at the hotel, the evidence planted in your car, even this confession. What do you want? Money? I'll give you everything. I want justice. And I want you to deliver a message to Felicia. James showed Eric his phone, which displayed a live video feed from inside James's house. Felicia was at his computer, typing what appeared to be fake search histories and emails. How are you? Security cameras. I had them installed last month when I started suspecting you too. Felicia's creating evidence that I've been planning to hurt you both. She has no idea she's being recorded. Eric watched in horror as his lover systematically tried to frame the man she'd planned to murder. Here's what's going to happen, James continued. You're going to call Felicia and tell her to meet you at our original location, the hotel. Tell her you have something urgent to discuss about the timeline. And if I refuse? James gestured toward the cliff edge. Then you go over right now, and I deal with Felicia separately. Your choice. Eric's hands shook as he dialed Felicia's number. Felicia? It's me. No. Listen, we have a problem. Meet me at the hotel in 1 hour. I can't explain over the phone. Room 237, like always. He hung up and looked at James with desperate eyes. I called her. Now what? Now you wait here while I go collect my wife. Wait here? I'm tied up in a car hanging off a cliff. Yes, that's rather the point. James climbed out of the BMW and used a hydraulic jack to slightly lift the rear wheels, making the car's position even more precarious. Any significant movement would send it over the edge. James, please. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. You're right about that. James drove his truck back down the mountain, leaving Eric balanced literally on the edge of death. Part one of his plan was complete. Now it was time to deal with Felicia. The drive to the hotel took 45 minutes. James parked where he could watch the entrance and waited. Felicia arrived exactly on time, her face a mask of concern as she hurried into the lobby. James gave her 15 minutes to get settled in the room, then called Eric's phone. Hello, Felicia. There was a long pause. James? Where's Eric? He's hanging around. Literally. Would you like to join him? I don't know what you think you know, but I know you're a murderer. I know you and Eric planned to kill me for my insurance money. I know you've spent months building fake evidence to make me look unstable. And I know that in about 30 minutes, you're both going to pay for it. Felicia's voice turned cold. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove anything to a court. This isn't about justice anymore, Felicia. This is about consequences. James hung up and started his truck. Time for the final act of this particular drama. Chapter 7, Judgment Day. James's phone rang as he drove toward the hotel. Felicia's name appeared on the screen. James, please, we can work this out. Her voice was desperate now, all pretense abandoned. I know how this looks, but Eric pressured me into everything. I never wanted to hurt you. 16 years of marriage, and now you're lying to save your own skin. How pathetic. What do you want? Money? I'll give you half of everything in the divorce. Just let Eric go. James pulled into the hotel parking lot. I don't want your money, Felicia. I want you to understand what you threw away. He ended the call and walked into the hotel lobby. The desk clerk barely looked up as James headed for the elevators. Room 237 was on the second floor, at the end of a hallway with no security cameras. James knocked on the door. Room service. Felicia opened the door with her phone in her hand, probably trying to call for help. James pushed past her into the room. Closed the door. She hesitated, then obeyed. James, please. 16 years, he said quietly. 16 years I worked to build a life for us. I got up at 5 every morning to build houses so you could have everything you wanted. I coached Emma's soccer team. I fixed your car. I loved you completely. I know, and you decided I was worth more dead than alive. James's voice remained eerily calm. You planned to murder me, steal my business, and raise my daughter on blood money. Felicia backed toward the bathroom. Eric made it sound easy. He said men disappear all the time, and the insurance would take care of Emma's future. So you're blaming Eric now? I'm saying I made a mistake. I got caught up in something I couldn't control. James laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You bought me gifts for 3 months, documented my supposed mental instability, and planned my murder down to the fake suicide note. That's not getting caught up in something. That's premeditated murder. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. There is no making this right. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. James pulled out his phone and showed her the video feed from their house. While you were here planning my death, I installed security cameras. Everything you've done tonight is documented. The fake search histories, the planted evidence, all of it. Felicia's face went ashen. You've been planning this. I've been protecting myself and my daughter from a murderer who happens to share my last name. I'm still Emma's mother. No, Emma's mother died the day you decided to kill her father for money. You're just a stranger wearing her face. James's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled. What's that? Felicia asked. A message from Eric. Well, technically from Eric's phone. He's sending you his location. James showed her the screen. The text contained GPS coordinates and a single word. Help. He's at our original meeting spot, the old mining road up Pikes Peak. You should go to him. This is insane, James. You can't just... I can't what? Kill you? The way you planned to kill me. James stepped closer. The only difference is that I'm giving you a choice. You can walk out of here, drive up that mountain, and take your chances with Eric. Or you can stay here and take your chances with me. Felicia looked at the door, then back at James. If I go to Eric, then you'll be together for whatever time you have left. And if I stay, James's smile was cold as winter. Then you'll discover what 16 years of betrayed love looks like when it turns to hate. Felicia grabbed her purse and bolted for the door. James didn't try to stop her. He waited 5 minutes, then followed her down to the parking lot. Her Honda was already gone, racing toward the mountains and her doomed lover. James drove his truck to a different overlook, one that provided a perfect view of the mining road below. He'd brought binoculars and a thermos of coffee. This was going to take a while. An hour later, he watched Felicia's headlights wind up the mountain road. She was driving fast, probably hoping to reach Eric before whatever James had planned could unfold. Through his binoculars, James saw her Honda reach the scenic overlook where Eric's BMW waited. The car was exactly where he'd left it, still balanced precariously on the cliff edge. Felicia got out of her car and approached the BMW cautiously. Even from a distance, James could see Eric gesticulating frantically from the passenger seat. What happened next was exactly what James had predicted. In her desperation to free Eric, Felicia climbed into the driver's seat of the BMW and tried to back it away from the cliff edge. But James had weakened the brake lines during his earlier visit. The car lurched backward instead of forward, and Felicia's panicked overcorrection sent the BMW sideways. For a moment, the car teetered on the edge like a seesaw. Then gravity claimed its prize. James watched through his binoculars as the BMW tumbled down the mountainside, sparks flying as it struck rocks and trees. When it finally came to rest at the bottom of the ravine, it burst into flames. The fire would destroy most of the evidence he'd planted, but enough would remain to tell the story. A troubled husband who discovered his wife's affair, snapped, and killed the lovers before taking his own life. The fake suicide note in his handwriting would be found in his truck, along with the hunting knife Felicia had given him. James packed up his gear and drove to his truck's final destination, a different cliff, miles away from the BMW's wreckage. He positioned the truck carefully, activated the cruise control, and jumped out at the last second. The truck sailed over the edge and crashed into the rocks below, completing the illusion of his own demise. James walked 2 miles through the wilderness to where Victor waited with a change of clothes and a different vehicle. "It's done?" Victor asked. "It's done. Any regrets?" James thought about Emma, asleep at Sarah's house, safe from the truth about what her mother had planned. None. Chapter 8, Resurrection. 3 months later, James Montgomery was officially declared dead. The investigation had proceeded exactly as he'd predicted. Police found evidence of his deteriorating mental state in the planted journals and internet searches, discovered his truck at the bottom of a ravine, and concluded he'd killed his wife and her lover before taking his own life. The story made the local news for exactly 1 day before being forgotten. James watched the coverage from a cabin in Montana that Victor had purchased under a false identity years earlier. Troubled local contractor snaps, kills wife and lover before committing suicide, James read aloud from the newspaper. Investigators say James Montgomery had been showing signs of mental instability for months. "How's Emma handling it?" Victor asked. "Better than expected. She's living with the Hendersons temporarily, but Ma will set up a trust fund that Peter Sharp is managing. She'll never want for anything." James had watched his daughter's grief from a distance, hidden in the trees outside the funeral home during the memorial service. She'd cried for the father she thought she'd lost, never knowing he was 20 feet away, heartbreaking at her pain. But it was necessary. Emma needed to believe her father was dead and her mother was a victim. The alternative, learning that her mother had planned to murder her father for insurance money, would have destroyed her completely. "The business?" Victor asked. "Peter's running it perfectly. He thinks he inherited it through the will. Doesn't know I'm still pulling strings from behind the scenes. The Henderson job came in exactly on budget, just like I knew it would." James had spent the past 3 months establishing a new identity and monitoring his old life from afar. Peter Sharp was proving to be everything James had hoped: competent, honest, and genuinely caring about the employees. The business was in good hands. What about Emma's long-term future? She'll be fine. The Hendersons love her like their own daughter, and they're already talking about making the arrangement permanent. She'll go to college, maybe take over the business someday if she wants. Peter's keeping my seat warm for her. James stood up and walked to the cabin's window, looking out at the Montana wilderness. He'd grown a beard and lost 30 pounds, changing his appearance enough that even close friends might not recognize him immediately. "You miss it," Victor observed. "The old life." "I miss Emma every day, but the old life was built on a lie. Felicia never loved me. She saw me as a convenient target. Better that she's gone and Emma has a chance for real happiness." James's phone, a burner model that couldn't be traced to his original identity, buzzed with a text message. It was from Peter Sharp, though Peter thought he was texting a potential investor Victor had introduced him to. Henderson project finished early and under budget. Emma came by to see the final result. She's proud of what her dad built. James smiled despite the ache in his chest. Emma would carry forward the best parts of what he'd created, without being poisoned by the truth about what Felicia had planned. Any second thoughts about not exposing what they did? Victor asked. Emma's better off thinking her mother died in a tragic murder-suicide than learning she was a would-be murderer. Some truths are too destructive to share. And Eric Conrad got exactly what he deserved. He helped plan my murder for money. The world's better off without him. James had felt no guilt watching the BMW burn at the bottom of the ravine. Eric Conrad had been a predator who'd helped Felicia plan an innocent man's death. Justice had been served, even if it hadn't come through traditional channels. So what now? Victor asked. Now I build a new life. There are construction projects all over Montana that need experienced foremen. I've got new credentials, new references, and enough money to start over. Under what name? James smiled. Robert Montgomery. Close enough to feel familiar, different enough to be safe. And if Emma ever needs you, I'll be watching. Always. She just won't know it. James had already established systems to monitor Emma's well-being. Victor would visit the Hendersons regularly as a family friend, keeping tabs on Emma's adjustment and academic progress. The trust fund James had established would pay for everything she needed, administered by Peter Sharp, who believed he was honoring a dead friend's wishes. She's starting to smile again, Victor reported. Mrs. Henderson says she's doing better in school, making new friends. Good. That's what matters. James's phone rang. The number was from Colorado, and James recognized it as Peter Sharp's direct line. Should you answer that? Victor asked. He thinks he's calling Robert Montgomery, a potential silent partner in the business. We've been corresponding for weeks. James answered the phone. Montgomery here. Mr. Montgomery, this is Peter Sharp from Montgomery Construction. We spoke about the potential partnership. Of course, Peter. How can I help you? I wanted to give you an update on the business performance and discuss the expansion opportunities we talked about. For the next 20 minutes, James listened to Peter describe the company's excellent financial position, the skilled workforce, and the potential for growth. It was surreal, hearing his protege describe the business James had built from nothing. There's one more thing, Peter said. James's daughter Emma has been asking about the business lately. She's only 15, but she's smart as a whip. I think she might want to be involved someday. What did you tell her? That her father built something special, and it'll be here waiting if she ever wants to carry on his legacy. James's throat tightened. That sounds perfect, Peter. You're doing exactly what James would have wanted. I hope so. He was a good man. Didn't deserve what happened to him. After ending the call, James sat in silence for several minutes. Peter was right. James Montgomery hadn't deserved to be murdered for insurance money. But Robert Montgomery was alive and free, with enough resources to build a new life and watch over his daughter from the shadows. No regrets. Victor asked again. James looked at the photo on his phone, Emma at her last soccer game, taken the day before everything changed. She was laughing, completely unaware that her mother was planning her father's death. No regrets, James confirmed. Felicia and Eric chose their path when they decided murder was an acceptable way to get what they wanted. They got exactly what they deserved. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 1 year after his death, Robert Montgomery was thriving. He'd found work with a construction company in Billings, Montana, and his experience and work ethic had quickly earned him a supervisory role. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was essentially doing the same job he'd done in Colorado, just with a different name and no emotional baggage. Victor visited monthly, always bringing updates about Emma. She was excelling in her junior year, had made varsity soccer, and was already talking about studying architecture in college. She wants to design buildings instead of just constructing them, Victor reported during his latest visit. Mrs. Henderson says she's been sketching constantly. James, he still thought of himself as James in private, felt a surge of pride. Emma was finding her own path, while honoring the legacy he'd built. Any word from Peter about business? Business is booming. He landed that big residential development contract, and he's hired 6 new workers. The Montgomery name still carries weight in Denver construction circles. James smiled. Peter Sharp had proven to be everything James had hoped for: competent, ethical, and genuinely invested in maintaining the company's reputation. Emma would inherit a thriving business when she turned 25, just as James's will had specified. She asks about you sometimes, Victor said carefully. Emma, asks me what her father was really like. What do you tell her? The truth. That he was the most honest man I knew, and that he'd have done anything to protect the people he loved. James nodded. It was important that Emma remember her father as he really was, not as the mentally unstable murderer the official story had painted him to be. There's something else, Victor said. Emma found some of her mother's things while helping Mrs. Henderson clean out storage boxes. She asked me why her mother had been buying expensive gifts for her father if money was tight. James tensed. What did you say? That people sometimes make surprising choices when they love someone. Which isn't technically a lie. Good answer. James had worried about Emma discovering inconsistencies in the official story, but Victor was skilled at deflecting her questions without outright lying to her. She's not stupid, though, Victor continued. She's starting to ask harder questions about what really happened that night, such as why her mother would have gone to meet Eric Conrad alone if she suspected he was involved in her father's breakdown, why there were no signs of a struggle at the hotel, why James would have driven so far to commit suicide when there were closer cliffs. James felt a chill. Emma's intelligence had always been her greatest asset, but now it might lead her to dangerous truths. What's your advice? Let her ask questions. If she's determined to learn the truth, she'll find it eventually. Better that she hears it from someone who loves her. James considered this. Emma was 17 now, nearly an adult. Perhaps she was old enough to understand that sometimes good people were forced to make terrible choices to protect the ones they loved. Not yet, he decided. Let her finish high school and get settled in college first. If she's still asking questions then, we'll reassess. Fair enough. But James, you should know, she's not broken by what happened. She's angry. Angry at who? At the situation. At losing her father. At not being able to say goodbye. But mostly, she's angry at the idea that her father might have been in pain and she didn't notice. James felt his heart clench. Emma was blaming herself for not preventing a suicide that had never actually happened. I want to see her, he said suddenly. James, I know it's dangerous, but I need to see that she's really okay. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Her soccer team has a playoff game next Friday in Denver. Memorial Park, 4 p.m. Big crowd, easy to blend in. You'd let me risk it? You're going to do it anyway. At least this way I can watch your back. The following Friday, Robert Montgomery stood among a crowd of parents and students at Memorial Park, watching a soccer game that James Montgomery would never officially attend. Emma wore number 12, the same number she'd worn when James coached her youth team. She'd grown taller in the year since his death, and her hair was longer, but she still played with the same fierce determination James remembered. She scored 2 goals and assisted on a third, leading her team to a 4-1 victory. She's incredible, James whispered to Victor. She gets that from her father. After the game, James watched Emma celebrate with her teammates, laughing and hugging Mrs. Henderson like the woman really was her mother. The sight filled him with both joy and sorrow. Emma was thriving, but without him. As the crowd dispersed, Emma looked directly at the spot where James was standing. For a moment, their eyes met across the field. James's heart stopped, certain he'd been recognized. But Emma's gaze moved on, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. She hadn't seen James Montgomery. She'd seen a stranger who reminded her of someone she'd lost. Time to go, Victor said quietly. They walked away from the field, James fighting the urge to look back at his daughter one last time. Did she see me? He asked when they reached Victor's truck. She saw someone who made her think of her father. But she doesn't know it was actually you. How can you be sure? Because if Emma knew you were alive, she'd have tackled you to the ground before you could take another step. That girl never let go of anything without a fight. James laughed despite himself. Victor was right. Emma had always been persistent to the point of stubbornness. They drove back to Montana in comfortable silence, both men lost in their own thoughts. As they crossed the state line, James made a decision. I'm going to write her a letter, he said. James, not to send now, but someday, when she's old enough to understand everything, I want her to know the truth. That her father didn't abandon her, that he loved her enough to disappear rather than let her grow up knowing what her mother really was. And if she never forgives you for letting her believe you were dead. James was quiet for several miles, watching the Montana landscape roll past. Then at least she'll know she was loved. 3 months later, James finished the letter. It was 27 pages long, explaining everything from Felicia's betrayal to his decision to fake his own death. He sealed it in an envelope addressed to Emma Montgomery and gave it to Victor for safekeeping. "When should I give this to her?" Victor asked. "When she graduates college. If she's still asking questions about what really happened, she'll be ready for the answers. And if she's moved on, then let her stay moved on. Sometimes the truth is a burden people are better off without." James returned to his new life in Montana, building houses and slowly healing from the wounds Felicia's betrayal had left. He never remarried. How could he trust another woman after what he'd been through? But he found satisfaction in honest work and the knowledge that Emma was safe and thriving. 5 years after his death, James received a package with no return address. Inside was a graduation photo of Emma in her cap and gown, along with a brief note. "Colorado School of Architecture, summa cum laude. She's following in her father's footsteps. V." James hung the photo in his cabin and smiled. Emma Montgomery was going to be just fine. And somewhere in Denver, a young woman was designing buildings that would stand for generations, carrying forward the legacy of a father who'd loved her enough to die for her, and then live for her in the shadows, watching over her from afar. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed James Montgomery had ultimately freed him to become someone better. And Emma would never know how much her happiness had cost, or how willingly her father had paid that price. Some gifts, James had learned, were best given anonymously. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.